Everyone, I am Jennifer Mendez, and I'll be your moderator for today's session on measuring the ROI of legal innovation. My guest today is the fabulous Floor Blindenbach, CEO and founder of Organizing for Innovation. Floor, thank you so much for joining me today.
Pleasure to be here, Jennifer. Thank you for the invite.
So I've heard you talk a lot about ROI, return on investment. Obviously, this is something that's near and dear to your heart. What are the various ways that you think it's important for folks to measure or calculate the ROI for innovation projects?
Jennifer, thank you so much for asking that question and having me in this session about the return on investment, because indeed it's near and dear to my heart. But let me start by complaining about return on investment, because I think it's a concept that everyone talks about, yet is often poorly understood, and especially the challenges with it. So first of all, if you really focus on return on investment, it's a financial metric, which means that it often prioritizes like the short-term gains over like the long-term growth. Another problem is that it maximizes like at efficiency and profitability. And at that point, it can kind of like come at the expense of like experimentation and exploration. And related to that, like innovation inherently involves like uncertainty and risk taking. And so if you focus too much on the return on investment, you probably will be biased to focus on more, I would call them mediocre projects. They're not necessarily mediocre, but not like your big wins probably won't make it because the return on investment just are not that obvious or not that clear or not that easy to calculate. And finally, of course, it's a very financial metric, so it does not capture the benefits. Having said all of this, it's important. And then I have another major challenge, I think, with the current way how we go about it is that if you put it all in a spreadsheet, and I've taught at business school, so I've seen a gazillion business plans and return on investment calculations. And I've become so smart, like I can get a 10% return on investment on any project. If you give me a big enough spreadsheet and enough assumptions that I can kind of like hide in there. I see you nod. That sounds recognizable?
Absolutely. And I think it's an important conversation to have, right? Because as you've indicated, sometimes it can stifle innovation. And so I think, if we sort of pull the curtain back and hide the spreadsheet, how do you quantify the intangible benefits of an innovation project? How do you make the business case so that your leadership team says, yes, go ahead and try that?
Yeah. I love that question, but I would like to before we focus just on the intangible benefits, let's get the tangible benefits right too, because while I hate return on investment kind of calculations, I do think it's very important to get the financials first right, and then focus on all the other very important aspects as well. And fortunately, there are better ways of going about calculating return on investment. Rita McGrath and Ian McMillan, they came up already 30 years ago with what they called the reverse income statement. And just for people that few people are familiar with them, but you may be familiar with Lean Startup, which kind of like originated from their methodology. So Rita McGrath and Ian McMillan, they are professors at the Harvard Business School. And they came up with this concept of what we call like a return for the reverse income statement. And that may be a helpful tool for the audience here, because I think that addresses many of at least the financial benefits, and it also makes it easier to then express like capture the non-financials. So what is it about? So traditionally, everyone is worried about generative AI and generative AI investment, so perhaps that's a nice example to take. So if traditionally, you would start with like the investment. We want to buy a tool, and again, like for numbers' sake, and please bear with me, I know that's not easy on a video where we're just talking. But say that you want to make a generative AI investment of $50,000. Yeah? And the question is that worth it? How many lawyers should be using it? How much time should it save? And you can do the math and make any assumption and hold a very nice story. And I know, like, hey, attorneys can defend that case. The problem is there are so many hidden assumptions and so many unknowns that it's very difficult to, to know how trustworthy these predictions are, and also then to hold people accountable at the end. So what is a reverse income statement about? Like, what is it the problem that it tries to address is like, get away with all these hidden assumptions and put them right up front. So you would really flip it around. So instead of asking about the 50K investment, you would start with like, what is the desired outcome? Why do you want this generative AI solution? What is the business goal? And the financial goal? Let's start there. What would be a reasonable goal? Reduce time spent on pro bono cases by 15%. I'm just tossing something out there. Yeah. So that's something you can just make a very clear statement about. And then you also know the facts, because you know like what you spent last year on pro bono cases. So again, like for round numbers, assume that in 2023, this firm spent 1,000 hours on pro bono cases. Then you can do the math and say, okay, so our AI project that aims to reduce 15% spent on pro bono hours, that means that of those 1,000 hours, 15%, that's 150 hours. So with our generative AI project, we are aiming to save 150 hours in 2024 or 2025. Well, how much money does that equate to? And again, for math simplicity, and you can look up like hourly rates of attorneys, but here we're talking about the actual cost, like what does an attorney cost? So again, for math's sake, let's say, make it very simple and say that your associate who handles most of the pro bono stuff costs $100 an hour. Now we know like the 150 hours that we tend to aiming to save at $100 an hour will be $15,000. I hope you bear with me here with the math. So that means that this project will never do more than $15,000 in savings. That's it. That's what we are aiming for, and that's where the reverse comes in. That means that you can maximum invest $15,000, because otherwise it would not make sense. Or you can say like, well, perhaps I'm fine like with investing $30,000, we'll get it back in 2 years' time. That's fine too. But then you can make very deliberate conversations about like, what do you expect from the team? So assume now that we want to earn that back in, like, we know what we're aiming for is to save $15,000. So now what are we going to spend to get to that 15% saving in pro bono hours? Well, we have a tool, and we're looking for a tool. And if you can find a tool for 10K and then have 5K for training, I think that would make a feasible project. But so as you can see, like you now look at a different way of investing. That 50K investment to save $15,000, that's not going to make it. So that's where that reverse comes in. Now you can say, well, I really would love that tool, and that tool would be very, very helpful to save us the 15%. But the tool is 50K. So the math doesn't work. But we can do more with it. So we can say like, well, because it could also save us in some non-billable work. Okay, so you add like 10% of non-billable work to justify it. But that means that totally fine if you want to invest $50,000, and now the team is on the hook for not only proving that they can do 50% of the pro bono work, but also 10% of the non-billable work. And this also will inform then your pilot, because if you're now doing a pilot, you're not testing if the solution can save attorneys time. No, you're looking very specific. Can it save 15% of the 15% in pro bono cases and 10% of the non-billable time? So you become just way more deliberate, and you also know what you need to hold the team on the hook for. So if the team got the investment, did the pilot shows promising results that over like a 1 month period, you kind of like see where it was going. Then you can decide to invest the 50K, and then at the end of the year, you can hold the team accountable. Did you make it or did you not make it? And then you can revisit the assumption, do we want to keep this software or do we not want to keep it? And that's also where you then have all the tangible and intangible benefits. In that decision, you can decide like, well, you know, That was really ambitious what we said, the 15% of the pro bono cases, that we didn't get further than 10%. But still, that's a significant saving, and we see that with it we got better communication. We were able to handle more cases. I just say, like, it gave us a lot of publicity, so you can then add those kind of like other benefits to make your investment decision. So that's what a reverse income statement is about, and I think that will make it much easier to kind of avoid many of these predictions and putting making it very clear, like, what is it that you expect, and hold teams then accountable for, like, hey, that's what you signed up for, that's what you're asking this investment for, so now you will need to deliver on that.
So start with the outcome and work backwards.
Start with the outcome, work backwards, and then when evaluating a business case, what is the team promising, and how are they going to prove these numbers? That, I think, makes for a much more interesting discussion also when making investment decisions. How committed is the team to proving that this is possible? Then getting a whole discussion about numbers that are basically opinions and made ups and not, it's not factual. So what we see is that if you do that reverse income statement, you get much better discussions also, like, so how are you going to prove this? What needs to be done? How can we help you? Those kind of questions. Yeah.
So with that, right, you now have the metrics for the actual return on investment. This is how much we would need to save, or this is a maximum of how much we can spend unless we can add additional benefits to whatever project, right?
Yeah, just a small warning where I want to pinpoint you off, and because you said what we, I don't know how you phrased it, what we should be. No, you phrased it differently, but it is like you said you were going to save this 15%. Yeah. So that's not a projection anymore. That's what you aim to, and anything underneath, you didn't make your numbers. Yeah. Yeah.
And so then obviously you may not make your numbers, but there may be some other benefits that arise as part of the pilot process, right? That justifies potentially moving forward. There are all these moving parts. What have you found to be most successful metrics to prove the value of a project, especially in the early stages when you're in that pilot phase?
In that pilot phase, like, in the end, it all boils down to either hours or money. And I think for most law firms, hours are very important. And sometimes it helps to just do the calculations, keep it in hours. So not even go to the money side. Sometimes you need to go to the money side because you need to, that's our currency where we can basically translate. But in the end, hours is more important and a more relevant metric for most attorneys. Will this save them 150 hours is for them probably a more concrete measure than the money associated with that. That being said, we often have discussions where you said, like, well, I have no idea what we spend on this. And I had, like, this was in the early days when I was still supporting many projects myself. A project that literally was stuck for 9 years because everyone was saying, oh, this costs us so much time. But the others in the firm said, like, well, but this is such a huge investment. And that makes it just like neither side can win because that's not a concrete argument. So, but neither side had numbers to kind of, like, well, the one side had, like, the investment was clear. It was an over $1 million investment. So that's not something you make. But while the saving was very soft. So what we helped them do is for a month's time, track how much time was lost in looking for stuff. Well, just gathering that data and making that hard. So kind of like do a pre-pilot, just figuring out, like, how much is the current process costing the firm? How much inefficiency is there? And once those numbers were there, the $1 million investment was an absolute clear cut, and within 12 weeks, the whole project was approved. So it's often like, what can you do to kind of like quantify those real cost savings? If you don't have the numbers, you may need to, like, do a pre-pilot so you have a really clear before and after.
Seen at least in experience over here it's really important to have the data. And so to be able to support these things. So your pre-pilot, right? You're looking, well, how much time are we spending now on this process, and how much time can we save if we change or we move to a new process or acquire a new tool? It's really important to gather that data as part of the process for any project. And especially in a professional services firm, organization like ours, right? Time is money. So we do talk about like the hours are important to the attorneys, but that's because it also equates to time they could be spending on other billable work or acquiring new clients, et cetera. So in the long run, it does end up sort of finding its way back to the money. And so it's easier to talk about the bottom line when you can translate that time is money, especially in law firm life, right?
But it also holds for the innovation project itself and the approval process itself, Jennifer. And I'd love to get your feedback on that. What we often see is that people don't want any of this. They said, just give me the tool and let me try it out. Like, why do I need to prove the before and after? Like, the vendor says it will save us money, we should invest. Why do so difficult? Come on.
We have a process in place. That's essentially our response, right? We have a process in place for a reason. We need to be able to justify the investment, and no matter what the investment is, right? It could just be a tool we already have that someone wants us to use in a different way, or creating a flow, right? Because there are people in the firm that create those workflows. Well, is it the best use of their time? How much is this flow actually going to help us? Is it going to save us more time? Is it going to create additional work? Will we need to hire more people to support it, et cetera? There has to be a process.
One step back, I think, Jennifer, why do you have all these processes in place? Why did you start putting these processes in place in the first place? What's the benefit?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the benefits speak for themselves, but I think it's because, especially in a law firm world, right? For us, you start off at a certain size and everything's sort of informal. And then the larger your firm gets, the more you start paying attention to everything going on. And you know this even now with the explosion of generative AI, right? There's so many tools available. Anyone can sell you a tool. And every tool sounds new and cool and shiny, but do you really need it? And so for us, it's intentional because we can't say yes to everything. There's no too many things on the market. We cannot say yes to everything. So
I think that's where like technology used to be like such a fraction of the budget. And I think that's what we are seeing, at least, is that for most law firms, IT costs are ballooning. So there is no way that you can say yes to everything. And they also start to realize there's so much underutilized legal tech. So that's why you need to have some of these processes in place and really start to think like, what is it that we're trying to achieve here? And the interesting thing is that we've often also seen that, like, for instance, take that 15% saving on how we do pro bono cases. If you start looking at that, sometimes they say like, oh, wow, we can easily save 15%. We don't even need a tool for that. Because they just realized that some of the workflows or some other things are really making the process very inefficient. So a lot more comes out of it. But I think where we are at that turning point is that previously profit margins were high enough that IT costs were something, it was in the margin. And I think that's what a lot of firms, and the larger you get, the more requests you get, but even for smaller firms, they see their IT cost ballooning, and that's where they suddenly are like, oh, wow, should we make this investment? And you get like this change of priorities, and then calculating the return on investment just comes with so much flaws and fraud that I really would recommend that reverse income statement. And every time ask yourself, like, what are we trying to achieve here? What are we trying to do?
So I want to go back to something you said, and we can close with this, because 9 years is a long time. $1 million investment is a huge, significant investment. 9 years is a long time to hold out on making that decision, right? And you think about all of the meetings that were probably held around it, how many people were involved, the cost, the hourly rate of those people, if you want to quantify that. How and
it was
when?
Pre-pandemic, by the way, so that, like, since the pandemic, I think decisions are being made a little faster, but still, like, go ahead.
How and when should a team consider either pivoting or entirely abandoning a project if it turns out not to be as valuable as originally projected, or you simply can't come to a decision after an unspecified period.
But priorities change, and I think that's fair to say. So but I would say that changing priorities is the least of your concern if you're overseeing these kind of projects, whether you're a COO, CTO, or an innovation manager, because that happens. Where priorities do change is like the attention of attorneys. They've gone to ILTA, they've seen cool stuff, and they want that. Where we do see that if there's some real commitment from attorneys in the beginning to help with some of these numbers and to gather some of this information, that's like a little initial test to see if they are really on the hook and are really passionate and are really thinking like, hey man, I'm wasting so much time on this needs to be solved and needs to be solved now. And the other advantage is like you can have 5 meetings about this. And that's what I would advise any COO, CTO, or innovation manager. How much talk do you do? Because if you could, instead of have them talk, do stuff and figure out these costs, then you can start setting up these projects and you have some initial data of the actual commitment and engagement of these attorneys. And if they see that like the work they do translates in a project, and you as an IT or or operation or in the innovation function, you can then spend your time on the people that are most engaged and willing to do the hard work that needs to be done to make the project a success. You can start to prioritize and get much more out of your time and out of the dollar investment. So that's one other piece of advice I would like to give people with it. Like this pre-work, it may sound like daunting. It may sound like, oh my gosh, like we're creating so much bureaucracy. But if you really would do the math and start keeping track of how much time you otherwise spent on talking, and I hope it's not 9 years, but even 3 months of talking, that's a lot of talking. And you can, instead, like with just 5 hours, we can scope out a project for an entire team, like just some dedicated and focused time. And you have just a much better discussion because now we're talking about facts and data instead of like what could be, should be, or what you would like to see.
So what I'm hearing is learn about reverse income statements if you don't know it already. It's the process behind lien, which many of us at law firms know all about. Make sure you're having conversations, understand your final outcome, what your end goal is, and hopefully you'll be able to make a good business case to invest in your innovation projects. Flor, I really appreciate your time. I think we'll probably follow this up with some written work or some examples that we can share with the ILTA community on how to start your reverse income statement if you're willing to do that. And I appreciate your time.
Happy to do so. And also on our website, you can find some information there as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Tell the people where that is, please.
That is www.organizingforinnovation.com, and the 4 is a numeric 4. So organizing numeric 4 innovation.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.